I'd like to welcome everyone to today's special lecture of the Max Weinreich Center. Our speaker is Professor Emil Draitser of Hunter College, who has quite a lot of interesting credentials in his biography. I will keep it relatively short because we want to hear him speak, not me. He was born in Odessa, and back in his Soviet life, as he says, he published both fiction and nonfiction. But eventually, he was blacklisted for an article critical of a high official, which prompted him to leave the Soviet Union and settle here. Here, he did a PhD at the University of California in Russian literature, and his first book published in the United States, Forbidden Laughter, Soviet Underground Jokes, brought him national attention. To date, he has published 10 books of scholarly and artistic prose, both ranging from sociological folklore studies and literary criticism, memoirs, biography of a Russian intelligence official that he met in the Soviet Union entitled Stalin's Romeo Spy. Just that title, I think I'm going to have to read it. And most recently, a novel on emigration from the Soviet Union. His essays and short stories have appeared in many American and Canadian periodicals, as well as in Russian, Polish, and Israeli journals. And for those of you who, well, I'll say that in a minute. He's also a three-time recipient of the prestigious New Jersey Council on the Arts Fellowship in Writing. He's working on a sequel to his memoirs right now, and a new collection of short stories entitled Chekhov in Brighton Beach. Before I welcome him, I just want to say that at the end of the presentation, he will take questions, and we also have books to sell, which we will take care of also at the end of the event. I saw one book in Russian, several in English, and one in Polish, for those of you who find Polish easier than Russian. Yay! And without further ado, Emil Draitser.
Thank you, Paul, for your kind introduction. I may wanted to say a few words before I start the lecture itself, that the subject of today's talk is sociological function of humor. I'll show you some of the kind of preliminaries, the general concepts of it, which is not necessarily specific for Jewish humor or Russian Jewish humor, but to any ethnic humor at all. But I I want to share with you that when I was working on my memoir book, Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, where I cite some of the Jewish jokes of the time, I never actually gave a second thought of what these jokes really represented until I was writing this. I was commissioned to write a book by University of, in Detroit University, it's a state university, in Detroit, book on social functions, on ethnic humor in Russia. And then there's a separate chapter. I decided to take a second look on this from the point of view what is known about functions of humor. It is sort of difficult for us on the surface to take it that humor is humor, we just talk jokes to entertain ourselves, but it's much more beyond that. Anyway, let me start with this, my talk. This is specifically about, specifically about a certain period of, in the history of Russian Jews. It's a period from the time of, as I specifically said, 1968. I think that's approximately the time when the immigration was opened. And 1991, very kind of, how you say, the year is sort of, I would not pinpoint exactly this year, but generally speaking, it's about the jokes relate to time of immigration when immigration was not easy thing. I'll tell you in a minute what I have in mind. So, actually, if we look into Jewish folklore in Yiddish, there's a proverb, laughter is heard farther than weeping. And what it actually means is exactly this, that weeping is weeping, means it's evoke certain emotion, but laughter has other ramifications. In other words, it was observed you can do much more with a joke just simply to entertain somebody. So what are these social functions? Joke telling within an ethnic group is a form of in-group discourse disguised as entertainment. Such jocular discourse performs various social functions. When a group member tells an ethnic joke, it opens the door for the in-group communication and invites group members to examine their attitudes and behavior. In other words, we know about, especially Jewish humor, is full of self-deprecating jokes. And it is not quite would be true to say that a joke that sort of Jews tell about themselves. Jews are different. There are Jews and Jews, so to speak. And when I was working on this book, on my memoir book, I realized that a lot of jokes that were told in Odessa, for example, were, let's say, self-deprecating jokes. It was about Jews, but other Jews who come from provinces, shtetl Jews, some kind of attitude toward them, and it's known not only in Jewish humor that if not for those provincial backward Jews, we would not, as a group, have a bad name. That's the concept behind it. And the social functions of ethnic jokelore dramatically increases in a volatile situation. And here I come to this period what I told you about, of volatility of a situation of immigration. Why? So this is my kind of major concept, that in Soviet time, due to the absence of formal Jewish organizations and any means of public discourse regarding the Jewish in-group concerned issues, many such functions were performed by the plethora of oral in-group jokelore of that time. In other words, as we know, there was practically no organization that officially would defend the interests of Jewish group in the Soviet Union. But when we look at, I hope by the end of my talk you would agree with me, a lot of that functions that usually performed in open society, let's say in America, were performed by this jokelore that circulated within the group. So why the situation was volatile? Though starting late 1960s, Soviet government formally permitted Soviet Jews to apply for immigration, such a step was doubly risky. By the way, just as a footnote for you, why it happened. I found it amusing that the idea to allow Jewish immigration came to the government, to Brezhnev, let's say, from unlikely source, from the KGB. It is now known, it's a published document now, that in 1968, Andropov, at that time the head of the KGB, together with Gromyko, who was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, to allow immigration of Jews from the Soviet Union having two objectives. Number one, if you remember, there was détente announced, a relationship between the United States and Russia and Soviet Union. So it was definitely the Jewish question, the oppression of Jews, for being forbid for them to immigrate, to have contacts with their relatives abroad. This is not good for the image of the public image of the Soviet Union. So we will achieve by that, we'll remove it. Secondly, some of the most active dissidents in this Jewish group we'll kick them out first. Okay? Just few of them. And maybe get rid of some old people we don't need anyway. And one more objective. Together with this group, we'll send our agents to Israel, which I'm sure they did. But what really happened after that just shows that these people knew nothing about the country. The moment it was announced that you can actually apply for immigration, they were showered by thousands and thousands of applications. They thought they would get maybe a few hundred, that's it. Thousands and thousands and thousands, and more and more and more and more. So they have to find some way to stop it, because they definitely were not interested to let all Jews go from the Soviet Union, and for one simple reason. The intellectual elite in the Soviet Union of that time, especially those involved in military-industrial complex, were Jews. Okay? So to let go the so-called the brain drain right away, they could not allow it. So there have been set some conditions of this immigration, which created this kind of a difficult situation. And here are what I wanted to, what are they? An applicant was rejected on deliberate grounds. His or her career irreparably ruined. What it meant actually that nobody, just nobody, could know for sure that he will be allowed. Once he applies for immigration, he will be allowed. I looked at my time when I was decided, I immigrated in October 1974. I was looking at people who were rejected and people who were, and I could not figure out what is the algorithm, so to speak. Is this important because you, sometimes they say, okay, you were involved with work in industrial, in military complex, you know, some secret things like that. No, some were rejected because they were simply, you know, I couldn't figure out why. They had nothing to do with it. In addition, once you do apply, you're marked. You're marked as unreliable. Sometimes if you work, let's say, in a newspaper or a magazine, whatever, you can lose your job because you're no longer ideologically, you understand, ideologically reliable. So that's the situation. So in other words, you have to play lottery. And oftentimes, I call it Russian roulette. Because in full sense of it, I mean, not of course physically, but your life, professional life is dead if they reject you. And we know from the stories of many dissidents that they were completely ruined, being behind 10 years, sitting and so on. Secondly, due to the lack of information, it was impossible to predict what life had in store for immigrants from the USSR outside its borders. Impossible. Of course, in my time, and I do describe it in the sequel of a novel of my memoir that I'm writing, and in a new novel that I just published on immigration, that, of course, we read some letters that will come from people already settled in Israel or United States, but you could never figure out what is what. Then the radio, Voice of America, BBC, Call Israel, we could listen only sporadically. It was jammed. So you could not figure out what and what. And oftentimes it was very difficult to make this kind of a fateful decision. What I'm going to do there? And actually at that time there was a joke circulated that actually expressed this kind of a sentiment, this kind of a mood in Russian Jewish community of that time of immigration. And took a form of Rabinovitz, which is the folkloric hero of Jewish, Russian Jewish humor. Rabinovitz is drafted into the army, and he is trained to be a paratrooper. So the drill sergeant said, listen up, comrades, here it is. You're getting all on this pickup. The pickup will take you to the airfield. There you will board an airplane. It will take you on 3,000 feet. Then you will jump, and then you will pull this ring of the parachute. If something happens, it doesn't open, you have some emergency parachute, you drill, and you smoothly land, and the pickup will be there waiting for you and bring you back to the base. So Rabinovitz follows the command, of course. He jumps together with others into the pickup. He goes to the airfield. They take him up to 3,000 feet. He jumps. He pulls one ring. The parachute doesn't open. He pulls another one. It doesn't open either. So he rushing head down and says to himself, I bet there will be no pickup there either. So that kind of atmosphere, which I want you to understand, was in which these following jokes that I'll illustrate my talk were in. In other words, this sense of high apprehension, of not knowing what to expect. So Jewish in-group jokelore of the time fostered the immigration option in many ways. With high degree of assimilation into the mainstream Soviet culture, jokelore laid the ground of immigration by reinforcing a sense of Jewish identity by means of patrolling in-group cultural boundaries. And here is what you understand. First of all, Russian Jews, by and large, especially younger generation, were not exposed to Judaism. Most of them didn't have any religious affiliation. They grew up, like I grew up in a family. My both parents were Jewish, of course, and we observed certain holidays, but it was no opportunity to really to know anything much about Jewish history, Jewish religion, anything like that. However, these jokes that circulated wanted to point something else. Besides all of there is something that makes us different from other people, from non-Jews. And here's the item that circulated at that time. Again, I wanted something else to say to you about the overall. I have a separate chapter in my book about the repertory of Russian Jewish folklore. Many jokes circulate and are redressed, and sometimes taken from last century, sometimes are from other cultures. But they are brought in, and they may serve, it may be one of the jokes, you may hear, oh, I heard it under other circumstances somewhere else. It really doesn't matter. It matters when, at what time, under what conditions they circulate, and what they produce. So the following item is the question: how people of different nationalities come to a party. An Englishman comes with his stick, a Frenchman with a bouquet of flowers, a Russian with a bottle of vodka, a Jew with a relative. How people leave this party. The Englishman with the same stick, he came in. The Frenchman with the most beautiful woman. The Russian with his face beaten up. And a Jew with little something for a relative who couldn't come. So the joke actually makes it very clear. You understand? It has nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with anything else, but still we are not the same. Still there is something in us, Jews, that we're different. So this is what I told about. Now, other jokes alienated in-group members from two out-group. What I mean in-group is Jewish in-group. Out-group is the Russians, in general sense, and the Soviet apparatus. So the Russians. It has this following item has some relation to the previous one that I showed about, is that, again, Rabinovitz is called in by his manager and said to him, tell me, do you like warm vodka? No, I can't stand it. What about sweaty women? No, not at all. Oh, congratulations. Then you'll go for vacation in January. Now, this would not be clear until we know something about the Soviet culture of the time. This typical way, or stereotypical, should I say, way of spending vacation in Soviet at that time is to go to some resort spa, where mostly what's going on was just drinking, boozing, and promiscuity. That's almost like, well, you wanted to free yourself from, spousal whatever boundaries, you just go there and enjoy. So again, the joke underlines, this is them, this is us, right? Needless to say that the man himself is the Jew is discriminated, says, who wants to go on vacation in January? And here is the Soviet regime apparatus. We're different. So many jokes start with the same kind of a probably nightmarish scenario for any Jew who lived in the Soviet Union at that time. That a Jew is called in who applied for immigration, and he asked, tell us, the officer said, why you wanted to leave the best country in the world? And the Jew says, I have only 2 reasons. First reason is I have my neighbor. When he is drunk, he bangs the door and says, wait, wait. When we finish off with the Soviet power, we'll get to you Jews. I don't want to wait. And the KGB officer says, what are you listening to this kind of backward man? What are you talking about? The Soviet power will be forever, ever, and ever. And that's my second reason. So jokes fostered immigration by reminding the in-group members about living in a police state. And this particular item was first produced, I heard, in the 50s. But then it was repeated again in the 60s, and it was perennial for all the time living in the Soviet Union. That, again, a Jew is called to the KGB headquarters and ask him, why you Rabinowitz make our life of our country difficult? Why do you give food to the anti-Soviet propaganda? You have a brother who lives in Israel, and you don't write him a letter. I have to explain here a little bit, because at that time, to have any contact by just writing a letter to Israel in the 50s, in the 60s, in the later, already marked you again, because old Russian tradition, not even Soviet, is to open up correspondence. So they knew that you have a relative, you have a brother in Tel Aviv, and you don't write him letters, and the propaganda says that we are preventing people from having normal kind of relative connections. So no more excuses. Here's the pen. Sit down right here and write him a letter. So the Jew sits down and writes, Dear brother, finally I found time and place to write you a letter. Also, jokes of that time remind the Jewish in-group members about their vulnerability of living in a hostile environment in which they have to hide their very name. A telephone in a communal apartment, a phone call. May I talk to Moshe, please? The person who picks up the phone says, we don't have anyone like that here. After a while, another phone call and says, may I talk to Misha? Moshe, it's for you. Just let's think about it. What the joke actually says. If somebody calls in and calls Jewish name, you better don't say that you, not necessarily you, but you're associated with a Jew. Okay? But inside, in this communal apartment, it's okay to be who you are. In other words, the outside world is hostile world. That's what the joke actually points out. Now, the jokes reminded about something that was ubiquitous and in many ways it was one of the main courses of being a Jew and living in the Soviet Union, is discrimination in obtaining higher education. Especially it was difficult to get, I can tell you my own story that I'm writing, I wrote it in some of my new chapters for my book, that I was in age, in about 8th grade or so, and my teacher of Russian composition, reading something that I wrote, said, you know, she said to me quite seriously, pretty much the way in America a doctor calls you and says, you know, I have to tell you, you have cancer. So she told me, you know what? You have literary abilities. And when I came home and told my mother, she says, oh no, oh my, oh wait, what is it? Oh no, you didn't misunderstood. No, why? Because we are talking about in the 1950s, especially in the 60s as well, to get education in the field of humanities for a Jew was impossible. You were not trusted. You were ideologically suspect. So that's why in this particular following item, you will see the setup of entry exam to one of the University of Humanities faculties. So the faculty, they usually ask questions that will be difficult to ask. So the question would be to this young man who wants to become a student of, let's say, Moscow University, said to him, tell us, do you know that Leo Tolstoy remembered his life from when he was 40 days old? And this is true, that's what he claims. This is Leo Tolstoy. To which young man says, no big deal. I remember myself from 7 days old. I remember very well when in our communal apartment came an old man with big beard. He washed his hands and he cut off my chances to get in your university. And also was a big of these jokes about discrimination obtaining employment. So a Jew comes to a circus and says to the circus manager, Russian of course, I can do somersault while on a tightrope walking. And that's what I can do. So the manager says, I'm not impressed, everybody can do it. Yeah, but I can do it sitting on a chair. I saw it as well. I can do it as well. Yeah, but I can do it while playing a violin. So the Jew sits on this chair and plays Paganini Scherzo Precioso, and he makes a somersault. And the manager says, I have to tell you straight, you're not Yasha Heifetz. Also, jokes of that time promoted immigration by pointing out that the paradoxical advantage situation the Jewish group found itself, the possibility to immigrate. And here's something that I have to explain, that when the decision about immigration was made by the government, they specified, as we know, Soviet Union, you could not immigrate from Soviet Union after 1927, period, it was closed. Now they announced, in order to cover up, this is not just because they're yielding to the pressure from the United States, from the public opinion, they say we will allow immigration of minorities, majority of which lives in capitalist countries. Okay? So who are the minorities? Of course, Jews, Armenians, and Germans. There were quite a number of Germans living in the Soviet Union from Peter the Great time and on. So that's how it was set out. So therefore, Jews all of a sudden became in an advantageous situation. Even and I was writing in my novel also about it, that you will seek a marriage with a Jew just to get out of the country, a Russian, if you're Russian or Ukrainian or whoever it is. And there was even a proverb like that a Jewish wife is not a luxury, it's a means of transportation. Okay? So that's how this situation looked like at that time. So, therefore, again, the KGB, this is again the situation, Rabinovich is called in and said, why won't you immigrate from the best country in the world? I don't want to, but my wife wants. All right, divorce her, you stay. Yeah, but her mother also wants to. Well, let them both, cut them off and you don't. Yeah, but her father also wants to immigrate. Cut the whole family out. No, but her brother also wants to immigrate. And her aunt wants to immigrate. Let them all go, but you stay. Yeah, but I'm the only Jew in the family. Now, and of course, large body of the Russian jokelore of that time worked toward consensus regarding immigration by way of ridiculing the hesitant. As I explained before, it was not easy decision to make. Very, very, very difficult. Especially since there were some Jews who were quite well set up, means find some, good job, managerial jobs. As I said again, many Jews worked in where their skills were needed and by the government, and they were quite settled. Yet they had to face the decision to go or not to go. So one of the ways of ridiculing is by attacking various reasons for wavering, such as fear of homesickness. And here's one of the items. Did you hear they opened restaurant Nostalgia in Tel Aviv? And what's this restaurant? Horrible service, they're rude to you, and they threw you out and saying, go kite back to Russia. Ridiculing indecisiveness in general, and here's the item that I know that existed for a long, long time and faced many Jews on the decision to immigrate. So again, the KGB man says to him, listen, we sent you to Canada, you came back too cold. You sent to Argentina, you say it's too hot. Finally, we send you to Israel, you say too many Jews, you came back. Now, here's a globe. Pick any point and go, I don't want to see anymore. So the Jew turns and turns and turns this globe and says, do you have another globe? Making fun of false hopes the situation will improve in time. It's only normal that people will say, okay, let's wait it out, things may improve, da-da-da-da. So in what sense? That the Soviet life within its perennial shortages will ever be better. So the item goes like that. That is a lecturer from Moscow says, life is getting better, comrades. Soon everybody will have their own apartment. Then another 10 years, everybody has their own car. And then another 10 years, everybody will have an airplane on your own. Why we need airplane? Oh, listen, it's very simple, very useful. You hear that there is fish available in Moscow. You jump in your plane and you go to Moscow. Because the shortage of food was always, especially at the time of immigration, in the 80s especially, was very, very acute in Moscow, in generally in the country. And Moscow was always better supplied. That's something to explain. So ridiculing those who believe that in some future anti-Semitism in Russia will subside. So this is the Soviet passport, and that's what I wanted to show you. This particular item, this item says in Russian, nationalность, means in English only ethnicity. And usually, the moment it says Jew, that's it. And by the way, how they decide that you're Jewish or not, that's also interesting. It's pretty much like in Nazi Germany. It's nothing to do with religion. But if your father and mother have in passport Jews, that's it. You're Jewish, you have no option. If you have one of the parents, let's say Russian and Jewish, then they can choose your nationality. But if they are in right brain, they will never write they're a Jew, unless they want some, you understand, in that kind of situation. So, the item that here is that, well, this is the passport that actually identifies a Jew. So, question, will there be the fifth item? This is the nationality, the ethnicity. In Soviet passport under communism. In other words, we're all moving to communism, things will be different. The answer, no. But there will be the sixth item. Were you a Jew under socialism? In other words, you will not escape it anyway. Jokes reminded also about lingering physical threat. The state-sponsored propaganda in the form of publications of anti-Zionist, read anti-Semitic newspaper articles and numerous pamphlets and books created volatile situation by reminding the Tsarist pre-pogrom tactics. So in other words, it was in the air, all kinds of, they can start it any day now. So under this, jokes reminded those who decided to stay that they will not be able to avoid their Jewish lot by hiding their ethnicity in some way. For example, through document switching. Again, the same, I'll show you. I fixed my problem. Means in this, my passport, instead of a Jew, it will say Russian. Jew, it will say Russian. And the reply to it is when they start pogroms, they'll kick you in your face, not in your passport. In other words, it would not save you. Some of them use religious conversion and thought that would help them. This is, of course, the most jokes, the most merciless jokes about that kind of a people in the Russian Jewish community. And here's the item. The scene is public baths. And in Russia, it's usually a big place where people bathe basically naked. So one bather says to another one, Ivan Solomonovich. And it says by itself, you understand, Ivan is a Russian name. Solomonovich obviously shows that his father was a Jew. Please do one of two things. Either remove the cross from your neck or put on your trunks. Okay. In other words, same thing. You won't escape. You will be identified. Jewish jokelore promoted immigration by appealing to a group member's self-esteem. This is also something that probably in a normal situation, normal Jewish community will do. Give a lecture about some outstanding Jews who contributed to world culture and so on. But in Russia at that time, they would ridicule by saying, okay, you don't want to go. Then what is a Jew in Russia for the year 2000? Remember, this is jokes about the 1970s. It was assumed that everybody will go having this opportunity. So the reply would be, oh, in the year 2000, a Russian souvenir. In other words, will be very few left. By the way, anybody knows how many Jews left in Russia today? Oh, you wish. No, 200,000, less than 200,000, out of 2.5 million. You understand? So the exodus from the Soviet Union, that's why I call it modern-day exodus, is comparable to the biblical exodus. If you recall the book of Exodus, it says 800 families count. It's approximately the same amount of people. Or another one is boosting the in-group morale. Do you know why Jewish kids newborns are prettier than the Russian ones? Because they're made for export. Reinforcing Jewish identity by way of identifying with Israel. This is something else that, of course, all became possible, and the strengthening of Jewish identity in Russia of that time was mostly started with the time of creation of Israel, and especially it was enhanced after the successful wars that Israel conducted with Arab countries. And that's why these following items actually reflect on this. And here is something that is, again, it's not so much, how to say it, like a punchline, as thinking that the word our has two meanings here. So one Jew says to another one, have you heard our radio announced that our missiles shut down 25 our jets. Now, thinking that the radio, let's say in one meaning, is our Moscow radio, right? Then our missiles, assuming, again, Soviet missiles, and we know that they gave weaponry to Arabs at that time, and they shut down, supposedly, right, 25 our, and this time our, Jewish means Israeli, okay, Israeli. However, the other reading of it, and that's why it's kind of a understanding of it, of this joke, is that Israeli radio announced that Israeli missiles shut down 25 our means Soviet jets, you understand? So that kind of a joke in which everybody's asking themselves, what is our? Who is our? Who are we? Are we Soviet? Are we Israeli? What is it? And that's ambiguity sort of probing the group. See, that's what it is. Also, another one, especially Moshe Dayan as a military leader, were extremely popular in the Soviet Union at that time. And the following item is that two Jews walk in the streets of Moscow, and they come up to this statue. One Jew is from Russia, a Russian Jew, another one is coming from the West. So coming from the West, Jew says, hey, is this statue to Moshe Dayan? And actually, it's a statue to Mikhail Kutuzov. And Kutuzov was a Russian military general, the hero of the war with Napoleon, 1812. However, they have something in common. What do they have in common? Yeah. First of all, Mikhail in Russian is Moshe in Hebrew, or, of course, for a Jewish ear, it's the same. And of course, one eye is missing. However, as we know, yeah, and the other Jew says, yeah, actually, it's about Kutuzov because Moshe Dayan has the other eye out. So I was with regret saying almost like, I wish it was to Moshe Dayan, but could we do it like this? And finally, taunting the hesitant ones with a pleasurable perspective that parting with the Soviet Union would provide. It's a joke about the parting, like taunting, see how it would feel good. And the joke is about Brezhnev. Brezhnev is coming to resort area, and here is the man, this is his real photo. He is coming to the beach in the morning, and all of a sudden he hears the son talking to him. Good morning, Leonid Ilyich. Please come to the beach. I warmed up water for you. Don't worry, everyone will be fine. Well, Brezhnev says, wonderful, so he takes a bath and so on. Then Brezhnev comes during lunchtime. And lunchtime, the son says, don't worry, Leonid Ilyich, I won't burn you, just take a nap. Everything will be fine. I'll give you just very fine tan, no problem whatsoever. I'll take care of you. Okay, he did it. Then, third time he comes in the evening, and the son doesn't say anything. And he says, what's the matter? You just talked to me in the morning, daytime. What's happened to you? Why are you not talking to me? And the son answers to him, kiss my ass, I'm already in the West. So, since 1968, nearly 2 million Jews left Russia. And it's not a surprise from what you heard that today a memorial to Rabinovitz, a hero of Jewish jokelore, is erected in Odessa, of course, of all places. Odessa, Ukraine. Here's this memorial, this little statue. And let's pay attention to it. Very skillfully done, by the way. I want to bring your attention to the following things. I don't know whether they will show, probably not on screen. Okay, first of all, a middle-aged Jew, bald. He looks more or less like Socrates in some, philosopher, ancient Greek philosopher. Something that is, of course, in Judaism, looking to things as they are all interconnected. In other words, the in-depth look into the universe. Now, he is also sitting in like a refugee. See, he has laptop around him and beaten up suitcase, right? And he looks, pay attention, with a watchmaker on his eyes looking into the sky. And this is the irony. Watchmaker lens has a short focus. So obviously he cannot find anything. You understand? He cannot see anything there. He just looks for something else. So in other words, to me, it reads like a metaphor of Jewish existence in Russia, that actually it was not meant to be the final point of Jewish place there. A wandering Jew keeps on because there is no place for him here. See, he's always on the go. Okay. So this is it's a little, by the way, if you travel to Odessa, it's on the premises of the Odessa Literary Institute, inside in the courtyard, this little statue. I think it deserves a much bigger one, but it's still Ukraine, not Israel. Okay. So that's what it is. And obviously, here would be applicable. Do you have another globe? Right? Because he cannot find a place where to go, what to do. I think it's. I liked it very much. This. That's it. I'm ready to your questions now. Yes, please.
Can you tie in the 68 decision to the 67 war?
What do you mean by tying? How it was related to?
Today's war really created a desire among Jews.
Oh, definitely, yes. That's
And the Russians knew that extremely well.
absolutely. I mentioned it. Remember when I talked about jokes about Israel, the pride of Israel. That's what came from after the war. Not so much about right away, because remember, of course, you know that when Israel was created, Stalin was still alive. So nothing like that was really possible. And again, from what we know, Stalin hoped that maybe it will be a forepost, since he knew so many Jews took part in socialist movement in his time when he was a young revolutionary. He had kind of wrong ideas about it. But definitely after military, the war of 1967, even to the extent you may say that I just started my professional life as a journalist, as a freelance journalist in the Soviet Union at that time, approximately at that time, I mean, shortly after that, probably 1968 or 1970, something like that. And people who were already in the newspaper, they say, you know what, there is now clandestine kind of a directive to everybody. Jews are not to be accepted for new jobs, not to be promoted, okay? So that's what's like a what do you call it? A mosquito in amber, frozen there. That's what it is. So it definitely has a big effect on the self-conscious of what kind of pride of being Jewish for the first time.
But I'm not just talking about the pride, I'm talking about the Soviet decision to start that double jeopardy, where they created an invitation to apply and then said, no, you can't. But they had a chess game, I think, going in their mind, letting some Jews go, bringing some agents in.
Yes.
I want to see a tie-in on the Soviet governmental level.
Well, they actually, the tie-ins that obviously they did in the same time, by allowing, as I said before, they did not suspect that there will be such an avalanche of application. They didn't know their country, in other words. You understand that if you're in a country that is the nature of the country. They did not know the mood of the Jewish community at that time. However, they also had a dilemma in international affairs that Arabs, of course, were opposed to it, of allowing Jews to come, because that obviously made the Jews, Israel, stronger. So they had to play this game. Exactly, they played this game. They did not allow, for many reasons, they didn't want many Jews to go. Plus, in part, because of the Arab, they still was on the side of the Arabs of that time. Yeah, please.
How much of the random selection, those who were able to leave and those who were not able to, the Jews who were able to leave versus those who weren't, how much of that was based on bribery?
Some, of course. Bribery is always, listen, even I know, even during Holocaust, some guards could be bribed, as far as I know. Some of those. But I don't think it was that, how to say, that pronounced, should I say. It still was very, very difficult to get out. Some of them, here's something that obviously I would, I'm a little bit talking about my future book, is that some Jews bribed officials. Let's say the hunt was, for example, for a good apartment. If you have a good apartment in Moscow or even in Odessa, then the local militia who has to write the permission would be interested to get your apartment. And that will be promoted. That's how it was done. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, please.
What is the situation today for the remaining 200,000 Jews?
What I mean by what's the situation? Definitely a far cry from what we was before. We never thought of it that will be a Jewish huge museum in Moscow. You know about it now. They opened. I didn't know that there will be a Jewish organization there. It's totally different. However, there are only 200,000 of them. We're talking about 1/10 of what it used to be. And many of them chose to convert to Christianity. Not many, but at least some of them who wanted to have a career. Their motives say, okay, here's the country, here's the prevalent religion is Eastern Orthodoxy. We have to be like everybody else. Whether it will help him or not, my personal opinion, I think I answer you with my jokes, okay? That's what it is. They would not escape it anyway. But yes, please.
Yeah, I'm interested in the specifically ethnic Jewishness of this concept. Maybe you'll agree with me. Russian literature, really there's no comic tradition. You do have Gogol, he's a Ukrainian. Maybe Goncharov, they're funny. But Tolstoy, Turgenev, they're not funny. Chekhov's not funny.
Whoa.
He's trying to be funny.
No. Excuse me.
Okay, but the point that I'm making is there an analogous sense that the Russians themselves have with their humor? I have a feeling that the Jewish, it's coming from a difference from your, Shalom Aleichem, it's coming from your Tevye the milkman, and Peretz, it's coming from a bunch of guys. That's their life. They gotta make fun of, they can't live. Mm-hmm. Where the Russians, I'm not so sure that that's ingrained. They wouldn't have every family have a funny guy in the Soviet.
That's true. That's true. I have to say, as in the United States, in Russia, 80% of writers of humor were Jewish. 80% of stand-up comedians were Jewish. Okay? So from that standpoint, nothing really changed. However, about Chekhov, just want to say, I'm sorry, Chekhov, yes, the Chekhov that is known in the West is the later day Chekhov. Chekhov who wrote plays and longer short stories. However, when he started his career writing humorous pieces, he was a student at the university, medical student, and he wrote quite a bit of very funny pieces that he wrote. So I wouldn't call it specifically Jewish ability to laugh. However, it's true that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, it's not in tradition of Russian literature. Gogol is Ukrainian, as you know, and Zoshchenko, another probably the funniest writer of Russian literature, was also Ukrainian. So there is something to it, but I don't know what I have to say. Humor most of the time is a survival mechanism. So humor is more needed for people who are not in power. If you're in power, you don't need this. Okay? And that's why I try to show that this humor helps other functions to fulfill, which otherwise you couldn't. Okay? Any other question?
Is it just a coincidence that the character Rabinowitz, that's also the real last name of Shalom Aleichem?
No, but Rabinovich is more or less considered to be a stereotypical name in Russia for Rabinovich. If you say Rabinovich, you cannot mix it up with anybody. You know, that's a Jew, that period. That's what it is, yeah. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I remember Ronald Reagan telling a joke about Russia. Do you know that joke?
He told many jokes.
Yeah, he told many jokes about Russia. One was that the guy went to fix his car, and the car maker, the repairman said it's going to take 10 years.
Yeah.
He had the car in 10 years.
Right.
So he says, 10 years, what time of day can I pick it up? He says, well, it's going to be 10 years from now. Why do you need to know the time of day? Because the plumber is coming on that day.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it is known that that Reagan picked up all his jokes from a Russian Jewish comedian, Yakov Smirnov, who came to this country, and he managed to make a name to himself. I admire him to make, he was very popular in the time, at least when I came, 1970s, 1980. That basically what he brought is Russian underground humor. What Reagan cited is Russian joke. I mean, Russian joke. Again, who created joke, whether the Jewish mind did it or not, is really, nobody really want to, how to say. There are certain things that are definitely, jokes that I cited today is definitely of Jewish origin because they definitely care for the Jew. Other are all, the one that you told, any Russian would laugh because it's all everybody knew about it. Okay? Any other question? Yes, please.
In reference to the statement you made about if you had a Jewish spouse, you would be able to emigrate, was there a very high rate of intermarriage between the revolution and 1968?
Excuse me, a high rate of what?
Intermarriage.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, look, to begin with, there was a lot of intermarriages before that. It's not necessarily exclusive. A lot of intermarriage. Moreover, in Russian kind of a folk kind, that's the kind, with all this anti-Semitism, which is pretty much inherent in Russian national psyche, even Russian historians today admit it. It's still, let's say, a caring Russian mother would want her daughter to marry a Jew, not a Russian, as a general concept. Why? Because Jews had this kind of, again, stereotype of being family men, of caring, of not beating up his wife, not getting drunk, that kind of a thing. So from that point of view, of course, many Russian women were looking for marriage with Jews. Yeah, please.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about, you said you grew up being Jewish in Odessa. What, if any, practice of Judaism there was?
Yeah, of course. Well,
Were the synagogues open?
yeah. I describe it in detail in my book, Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, which is published in University of California Press here today. Because it is interesting that right after the end of World War II, and that's my time when I was remember, the synagogue that existed before before World War II, was bombed and was not allowed to be restructured after the war, because remember, the time after the end of World War II, this time of high Stalinism, of heightened anti-Semitism, campaigns against Zionists and all of this business. But there was one rabbi who came back from the war, and he begged the authorities to allow, they said there are so many, 100,000 Jews perished in Odessa ghetto during World War II, and one of them was my grandfather. And so he came to the authorities begging him, look, I understand you don't want to be in the middle of the bomb, but would you allow us to have some old building at the outskirts of the city that people can come and do the outside, do some Jewish prayers, some of it, whoever, it was considered to be, remember, the religion overall in Soviet Union was never prohibited. It was highly discouraged. In other words, if you're a party member and you notice that you will come to the church, you have a problem. But if not, old people usually say, well, what do you want from them? See, the whole umbrella of the Soviet propaganda was that people who were born before revolution, they still, by definition, have birthmarks of capitalism in their consciousness. In other words, individualism and all of this kind of prejudices and so on, shortcomings. Okay, let them live their way out, that was. But so it was not totally discouraged. But with Judaism, it's a different story, especially after World War II, with Stalinist, anti-Semitic campaign. So therefore, yes, there was a little synagogue on the outskirts, and I describe in one of the chapters how even matzah, you couldn't buy matzah all the time. You could buy it. Maybe some of you came. I gave a talk here about. I read a chapter about the going to buy matzah on this outskirt because what little bakery was made, and it was available only during Passover, only in this particular place, and you have to bring your own flour. Because I couldn't understand why. I mean, sometimes flour is in the store. Why wouldn't they send by? No. It was considered just, community service. In other words, they didn't want to make it as difficult as possible. So just to answer your question. But otherwise, no, of course not. Nothing like that. Even to that extent, my cousin's grandfather was the treasurer of Odessa synagogue. And I just learned just recently, he lives now in Santa Monica in California, that he had bar mitzvah because his grandfather was the treasurer. He had a bar mitzvah, but they stipulated no member of extended family is coming. Only the mother, father already perished during the war. Only the mother came and the grandfather was. That's it. Not to make it like a big deal. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Prior to the Six-Day War, the early middle-60s, there was agitation in the West for Soviet Jewry. Were Soviet Jews aware of that to any extent?
You say prior to 1960s?
Prior to 1967.
Well, only, as I said, it was not, the country was pretty much closed. Only through the radio, as I said, jammed radio, BBC or Voice of America or Call Israel, we heard something of it, but we didn't hear it in the full length. However, later on in the 70s, I remember how I was touched to tears when I met my friend, also from Odessa, who was in Moscow at that time. And he said that, can you believe it? He said, there was a delegation of Jews from Chicago, and they say they have their bumper sticker, Save Soviet Jews. Can you believe that? I'm admitting to you, it was tears in my throat. I could not believe it. Somebody cares about us. We felt completely cut off. And that's why all this mood, as I described in my presentation, of mood of going outside of this world in which you felt you were forever. And nobody cares. It was so kind of pregnant with all kinds of consequences. Yes, please.
Can you talk a little bit about the context in which these jokes were told? Probably it was placed at, all Jewish gatherings. So where could you hear a joke and when?
That's a good question because you would not tell this joke to just a stranger. In a way, if you tell a joke of that kind, it means you trust the person. So usually it comes from people, your friends, some coworkers that you trust, they would tell you, that's how they passed on. So it was not, needless to say, no publication whatsoever. Of course, it's only oral, and we know what's in best in Soviet time, especially before World War II, and there's high Stalinism, and shortly after, you can get jail sentence for they consider anti-Soviet joke. So you have to tell it only to among the people you trust. So most of the items that I told you, they were obviously among the Jews. And that's why, again, I reinforce what I'm trying to say, that's why it was the sense of it. A Jew tells to a Jew a joke with a point. And if you ask me what's the difference between, let's say, you talk about Russian humor and Jewish humor, Jewish humor is never entertainment for entertainment's sake. It always has some point. Some point. So you will not find a joke that's simply like Russian joke that plays just on the funny sounds, things like that, on verbiage. No, it always has some kind of a point, pretty much in tradition of Judaism, so I think that should be not a surprise. Yes, please.
Since the fall of communism, which is about the time you ended 1991,
Yeah,
earlier,
yeah.
has there been a change in the type of humor in the Soviet Union, and are there Jewish comedians, so to speak?
Very good question. I watched, since I wrote, 3 or 4 books on humor and sociology of humor, I watched all of this, more or less. And I have to say that as Jews left Russia, underground humor left Russia as well. You would not find, sometimes I looked at the stand-up comedian, of course they're still there today, and it doesn't have this edge at all. It's all not funny, really, to me at all, because it doesn't have this saturation. You see what I mean? Not just seem to make you laugh, but make you think, and that's the... So it is definitely much spare kind of a situation in terms of humor. Okay, you wanted something else, yeah? Yes. Yes, please.
Was there, I think you kind of basically covered this, but were there any non-Jewish Russians who tried to pretend they were Jewish in order to leave? Because I know, like, I have family in Brooklyn, New York, and Brighton Beach became overwhelmingly, or it felt to some of the rest of us that it became overwhelmingly Russian Jewish.
Right.
And we thought, like, wow, were there that many, to come over, or were some people just saying they were Jewish to get out of the Soviet Union? But from what you said, it all involved intermarriage. But like, did anybody try to pretend they were Jewish to get out, or it wouldn't have worked?
Well, this is 2 different things. One thing is you wanted to pretend that you're Jewish means by marrying. Just pretending would not make it. You can't come to the office and say, hey, do I look Jewish? No, you have to, you have to show a document, right? So, but another question would be very kind of apropos what you're asking. Can you really pretend to be a Jew if you're not? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's the set of mind. It's a different set of mind.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, please.
This is more about Russian humor. There's an interesting documentary. It's called Exporting Raymond.
Yes. Of course I saw it, yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
How the jokes didn't work in Russia.
Yeah.
Because of the attitude towards men and women.
Of course, well, but this is kind of, has a double-decker to this story. Exporting Raymond, we're talking about. Anybody who may know, it's HBO special, I think it's a documentary, that, of course, you know this American television show, Everybody Loves Raymond. So the Russians bought the rights for this. They wanted to stage it in Russia. And they invited a producer to come to Russia, the producer of and help them to stage it in Russia. And of course, that would be predictable because humor is heavily based on the cultural concept already built in society. So some of things didn't work. But what makes it more interesting, that although Raymond is not Jewish, but the writers are Jewish. And the producer is Jewish. And many of the characteristics of the mother in this show are Jewish. You see my point? So therefore, you cannot simply transfer it easily, you see, to a Russian situation, because there it's all play. So it did not work out. But I was really amused when I watched this, that they showed the typical kind of they invited this producer. And remember, he complained, nobody wants to talk to him. Why they invited me? Why? I wanted to help them. Only at the moment, if you remember, when the high boss came in, and they didn't know how to solve a problem, they talked to me, told to me. It was very amusing. I saw that's nothing really changed. Nothing really changed for that. Yeah, please.
I'm looking at the title of your book.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, because that's good you brought it up. The title is, the book is not just about Jewish humor. It's about humor of the time that I collected and I lived in the Soviet Union. There was a large body of jokes circulated in Russian community, oral jokes, about different ethnic groups, about Ukrainians, about Georgians, and about Chukcha, It was an ethnicity that at the far north, something similar to Eskimo in this country. So they were portrayed, again, stereotypically, as simpletons. So when it came to the title of the book, the publisher asked me, I said, okay, I think the punchline, this will be from the following Russian popular joke, is that in one of the towns, northern towns, a policeman, a street policeman, sees a pickup with carload of penguins coming to the intersection, and the driver is a Chukcha, that kind of simpleton. So he asked him, listen, the Chukcha asked the policeman, where can I take the penguins here? And the policeman said, what are you talking about? Take them to the zoo. And the Chukcha says, oh, good idea. So he escaped. And then after a couple of hours, he sees the same policeman, the same carload comes back with the same penguins. And he says, Chukcha, the policeman asks Chukcha, listen, didn't I tell you to take them to the zoo? Yeah, I took them. Now I'm taking them to the movies. Yes, please.
It's a great joke. Did the type of humor change, I'm talking about Jewish humor, from the particular region that the people live? Say, you're talking about Odessa, or you're talking about St. Petersburg, or wherever, other parts of the country, that reflected their geographical place, or was it all Jewish humor, not related to where they were living?
Jewish humor all the way, because that's the whole point of it. Humor, this kind of Jewish joke, united Jews. It really didn't matter. Are you from Odessa or from Moscow, wherever you are? It's still you identify with it, because the situation it's nothing. You understand, nothing regional in it. It's Jewish. If you're discriminated, it doesn't matter where. Is it Leningrad, and Moscow, or Odessa, or Kazakhstan? Doesn't matter. Okay? Yeah, please. That's a good question, because first of all, if you talk Asian part, it's no longer Russia. Yes. Kazakhstan is a separate country. And I have to say, excuse me? Caucasus. Yeah, Caucasus, yeah, also, there's a separate country now, Georgia, for example. Now, but if you wanted to kind of pinpoint, is that in the Soviet time, Jews who lived, let's say, in Uzbekistan or in Kazakhstan, on some other areas, they were not as subject of discrimination as they were on the territory of Russia or Ukraine, especially Ukraine. Okay? Why? Because Ukraine had a double-edged hatred toward Jews, not only traditional from the pogroms. By the way, one of my aunts actually died during pogrom in 1919 on Ukrainian territory. My mother is from Umань, which is near Kiev. So besides that, there was something else politically connected. As we know, in 1932-33, there was a so-called Holodomor, means huge portions of Ukrainian population were artificially made to starve to death by Stalin's orders. And by sort of sending many commissars at that time who were Jews from the NKVD and other, made Jews as being responsible for all these actions. So that's why the Ukrainian nationalism, so to speak, on Ukrainian, in other words, many Jews who live in Moscow, for example. I lived 12 years in Moscow my last time when I came. I grew up in Odessa, got my first degree in Odessa, and then I moved to Kiev. And so I saw that there was not such a thing. People who read my book in Russian, it came also, the Shush, I also published before that in Russian with some less chapters, Kto ty такой? When they read the book, they said, you know what, it's really peculiar to Ukraine. In Moscow, it was not as acute. Because remember, Germans were not in Moscow. In Odessa, 2.5 years, there was a Romanian and German occupation and anti-Semitic propaganda. So there were generation of young kids, and I describe it in my book, The Shush, that actually were anti-Semitic without understanding it. They thought that's normal, because that's what they heard from early days. So that's the difference. So even today, I'm sure it's a difference for them. Yeah. Okay? Last question, okay. Yes, please.
There's two pieces of late Soviet popular culture that I've seen that I think do have a degree of irony. I wonder whether you perceive either one of these, or whether you think the audience might perceive either one of these as having, some kind of Jewish characteristics. One is, I forget the exact name, but it was a movie called something like The Story of a Dentist, the memoir of a dentist. You know this one?
No.
It's a sort of allegory, like a parable, where a dentist invents a painless way to extract teeth, but all the other dentists are very jealous, so in the end the dentist gets kind of destroyed. That was made maybe mid-60s, but then there's another one I'm sure you know, Cheburashka.
Yeah.
You view that as having, I mean, I know there were a lot of Jews involved in making it.
Of course.
It has a gentler kind of tone, it definitely has some irony. How do you think it was perceived in terms of who was making it? And
Well, to begin with, I have to say something that I thought over the years. What really happened for us to understand the position of Jews in the Soviet Union for its longevity? The picture is not that simple. It would be assumed it was only discrimination, the rest of it. The truth of the matter is that after revolution, when vast majority of Russian intelligentsia, the core of cultural elite, left Russia or was killed or sent to Siberia, this vacuum very quickly was filled with Jews who, for the first time in their life, was given equal opportunities. In other words, they were not given privileges, but they won by sheer energy, willingness to succeed, all these qualities and so on. So if you see, let's say in the 20s, shortly after the revolution, the whole slew of writers and literary scholars especially are Jews, the best of them, okay? So that's what they created, a core of Russian cultural elite. When it comes to the movies, again, 80% of them, if you look, I have a list of who is who in the cinema, were again Jews. The most prominent directors, movie directors, and some actors and some big actors, of course, it means how you look like, were Jews also. So of course, making it, of course, not willingly. I'm sure that it's not. But if you are, you are. In other words, as a writer, I know no matter how you hide yourself, you show up somehow, right? Somehow they know what you think, and yeah, please.
It's true of the industry in England, France, Mexico, Argentina. Jews went into that business.
Yeah, and. Yeah, part of it is one general kind of concept of Jews living in diaspora, the marginality. Same thing happened in America in the beginning, how Hollywood and why Hollywood was created. Because Jews were not allowed at that time to get to the mainstream of American life. So therefore, they were on the periphery of it. Entertainment basically was invented by Hollywood, as we know. They came, remember the story of it, they came just to show this, to make a buck, showing some movies, and gradually it worked in a big art. So Jews are everywhere the same. I mean, in the same situation. You see what I mean? No, marginality, no. First of all, why they went there? Because of, as I said, it's easier to make yourself. By the way, it's not only Jews. Let's say other groups that came into America is considered to be latecomers, and at some point Italians. Pay attention how many, besides Jews, Italians are in the movie industry, right? Directors and studio and actors and so on. So that's kind of a thing. So that's kind of explain why in Russia as well.
We have to stop here. I hate to be the bad guy.
Thank you.